Greetings, Kerbonauts. This is Kerbal Space Program. I'm Bob Fitch, and this is episode number 13, Lucky 13, of Project Odyssey. And this is what it looks like when I set my guys into the simulator to experiment with lander technology. This is in LLL Labs mostly. I'm over in the mod viewer. This is not actually Project Odyssey's install. This is one of those ones that I've talked about a few times, what I call the mod viewers, where I have one or two of my mods installed in them so that I can look at the different parts and see what I like and what I don't like and what I might like to bring over into the Project Odyssey install. I'm finding out here that this is a little bit difficult to actually maneuver. It lifted off okay, but now I'm having some trouble keeping it from tipping forward. I was hoping that by powering back I would be able to tip forward again and use that RCS, but alas, no such luck. I don't have any particular purpose in mind with my experimentation. I'm just looking at lots of different parts, like this particular one here that lowers down a cargo bay like thing that maybe I could put a lander in there, or not a lander, a rover inside the lander and extend it down like that, and the rover could roll off the bottom once it touches down. Obviously it's only up on those struts so that I can look at it, and if I were to make a real lander of any kind out of it, it would be on something much more elaborate than that. Perhaps I might use some of these special landing legs you can see here. So I think it might need to be extended down a little bit more than it actually is, because it rocks a little as it's coming up. And those things sink, you can see them there. They actually are supposed to be like skids, and they're sinking down into the tarmac a little bit. But they still might work for Duna, who knows. I'm pulling them up here to see whether or not it's just something to do with the way that they had started out, like they had been, where they were already extended inside the space plane building. But no, when they come and they extend down again, they push right into the tarmac and sort of sink in and disappear a little bit. Nonetheless, I kind of like them, and I might be using something like this when it comes to Duna, where I can put my lander, like I said, in there, and even if it's a really big one, if I hook those two things up together to an action group, they could lower down at the same time, and then I could just roll right off the back with a nice big lander, rover, whatever, drive around Duna, maybe put some robotic automated thing in there. And the cab too. I'm kind of interested in which one of these I might like to use. Taking a look inside here in the IVA, look around, see what all the controls are like, see how much of a view it has out the sides, and I'd say that's actually pretty decent. This is obviously the commander's seat, the pilot seat, because the other side doesn't have much of anything on it. However, it still has the pretty good view that wraps all the way around both sides, so I might be able to use it. We'll keep this one in mind when it comes time to actually making a lander for Duna itself. But it's not the only cab shape that comes inside the LLL pack of parts. There's also this one here that looks a little bit like a catfish. In fact, the name of that cab is a catfish cabin. The thrusters on the side here, though, are obviously not pointing in quite the right direction, or, I don't know, maybe it needs a little extra attitude control. That didn't work out so well. But this isn't all we're working on right now. We also need to get a Kethane lander to go send to the moon. And this isn't even remotely close to what I really want it to look like. I'm just throwing parts on here so I can experiment with them. First things first though, I forgot an antenna, so there's no remote tech communications. This time it has an antenna, and I've put 4 engines on the bottom, but apparently there isn't fuel crossfeed between them, and so only one of them has any power. I'm going to have to put some extra tubing on the outside there to allow them to actually transfer the fuel between all 4 engines. Now it's time to see how well I can actually maneuver this thing with just the thrust vectoring that's on those engines. So let's power it up and give it a try. Okay, well that answers that question. It doesn't work at all. Alright, well, let's go back in and try putting on it some kind of gyroscope or maybe some RCS. Ah, I know. We can balance it just a little bit better. Make sure that center of thrust is directly underneath the center of mass. Okay, well that still didn't work out. I think we're going to need to put a nice gyroscope on it. One thing that I haven't really done so far, but they seem to work much better in KSP when things have that on there. Because you can see here, I had it fairly centered. It's off maybe just a tiny bit, and that tiny bit is what's making it flip over onto its face. So we're going to have to take care of that with some extra attitude control. And I'm not talking rinky-dinky. I went out and Googled yachts and control moment gyroscopes used to stabilize large ships like this. That's the kind I'm talking about. Something beefy. Something like this spec I found for one you can put in a boat, a large yacht like that has 8,000 Newton-meter seconds of angular momentum and anti-roll of 17,000 Newton-meters. However, it takes up over 500 kilograms and uses 3,000 watts of power. So these are the first three that I'm adding right here, although you can see that my current copy routine that's in my program, the C# program, it must have messed up on actually getting all of the textures that I'm going to need, because that thing came in black. But that's what I'm thinking I might put on the side for some radial thrusters that'll help give me some attitude control. I'll put a lot of vectoring on those. I'm going to increase the mass of these engines and make them pretty much atmospheric engines with some rather low thrust to weight and a rather low ultimate delta V capability and lower ISP. But at least they'll be pretty versatile for landers. And then these will be very strong RCS attitude control jets that I'll put on there. And this will be a very powerful control moment gyroscope, except I'm going to make it very, very heavy in order to account for the fact that it is such a good gyroscope. Unlike the real game, where sometimes really awesome gyroscopes, they don't take much mass at all, and that's probably a little bit unrealistic for something the size of a lander. There we go. I have rerun my program, found the problem. So the engine there is now not showing up black anymore. That's what it's going to look like. The reason it had shown up black is it was actually from a mod, but it was using some stock textures that I needed to copy over. It's showing up in the wrong category though. Right now it's under the control group, and even though it's for control, kind of, it's still an engine, so I'm going to move it over to the engine group. I am going to leave the gyroscopes and the RCS here in this control section though. And let's see if we have the stats right. Yeah, so I was thinking I might use 4 thruster power, and my usual thruster ISP goes from 80 to 250, so I'll probably use that as well. The gyroscope has a 10 torque. However, check it out there, it's a 1.5 ton device. That's a little heavier even than the ones that I was saying would be used for boats, but that's because this is rated for outer space. And let's see here, 50 per minute. I'm not sure if that's right. I'm gonna have to double check that. That seems low. Sure enough, I just ran the program again after fixing the bug with it, and now you can see here that that is using 6.9 per second, which is much higher. One side effect of fixing a balance problem like on that part where we fixed the electric charge is the other one that I had already done. This reaction wheel, even though it was a very low power in its torque values here, it also went up just a little bit here in the electric charge it was using. It's probably not going to affect anything because I'm sure the satellites aren't going to be doing that much that it needs to worry about that. Unless, of course, I wanted to also have that always on. Unlike normal KSP, this would only drain that 10.4 per minute when I was actually using that. However, this one, the way these work is they take a certain charge to spin up, a certain amount of time to spin up to their appropriate speed, and then they stabilize by operating, like shifting around in order to keep everything stable, but they're always spinning, and that costs power all the time. For now though, I guess we'll just stick with the standard KSP technique of only requiring that charge when it's actually applying the torque, because that's closer to what stock is, and I don't know, I'm just gonna go with that And finally, if we switch back over here into propulsion, you can see I have now moved that engine over to here. And so we've got the Phoenix 15. It's got 25... Whoa. RCS power. Okay, I've got one more bug. I have to make that an engine and not an RCS jet. There we go. Now I have it set up as an actual engine. You can see the max thrust now, 15. That's why it's a Phoenix 15. And it's using liquid fuel and oxidizer and is set up as an engine with an ISP for sea level and vacuum. The only problem is it slipped back into the control section, so I'm going to have to make one more change to get it back under propulsion. And you can see this is exactly what I go through in pretty much every single episode when I'm making anything new, where I have to make little changes and then reload and make little changes and reload, and it can sometimes be a fairly slow process, but I'm giving you a glimpse in this episode into exactly what that slow process looks like. Next up, I installed hot rockets on those engines, but that isn't exactly what I'm looking for, I don't think. What about you? They came out, there's no throttle right now, they just came out automatically animating, like perpetually just burning as if they had been turned on. So I decided to switch away from those, and I'm using instead these retextured Rockomax engines. I've also put a couple of those new gyroscopes up on there, as well as restructuring it so that it should be a little bit more balanced because it's completely symmetrical. There's some vectoring on those Rockomax engines, and so I'm giving it a little bit of a lift off here to see how well it does, and it actually seems like it's doing fairly well. I guess I'll just stick with these engines for the medium to small size landers. I might want to put some much larger engines on anything that's going to be a very heavy landing on Duna, but we'll see about that. Not crashing when it lands is at least a very good first step. It's burning through its fuel pretty quickly though, so I can't imagine what I'm going to have to do in order to get it to land when I have to put a lot more fuel and a lot more structure to it. Testing out the drill after it lands looks like that's okay, so now it's on to the next test. In this one, I'm checking to see whether or not I can mount it inside a frame sideways. If we rotate it on an Infernal Robotics hinge, then perhaps we can get it with that little bit of an angle we've created there to go down underneath a frame like this that's sitting on a couple sets of landing legs that can be retracted in the event that we want to stick this inside a fairing or something like that, and then have it pop out and the legs can extend and down they go. Alright, that's enough testing for now. Since we still technically have our Duna launch window, I'm going to let the planet rotate around here to that night terminator, and I'm going to launch another set of satellites that are going to go to Duna. These are, because of that whole fuel shortage, going to be launched up on one of my solid rocket booster lower stages here. We definitely need to get a test going over at the moon to bring in Kethane and see whether or not it's going to be possible to harvest that abundant resource in order to generate fuel. So we'll be getting to that very soon, right after this launch perhaps. I haven't quite decided yet. I'm actually recording this and then laying it down in the editor, and then I'll go and I'll see what I want to do next. I'm not entirely sure. This one though, you can see that solid fuel had throttled down to go through max Q and is now throttling back up again as it gets closer to the end, though it is beginning to throttle back down right at the very end. And then once it's totally drained out, which takes a little bit longer because of how slowly it actually burns off that last little bit, we'll decouple that, and now we can power up that Centaur engine and just keep on flying. Notice that periapsis in the flight computer there, it's still negative. Well, whatever, doesn't really matter. We're going to set our communication system to point temporarily at Tidris 2 and then just keep on powering up and flying straight toward Duna. We'll put out just 3 of the 6 solar panels for now because we don't really need more than 3, I don't think. And we've set that communications dish a moment ago to point at Tidris 2 just in case I want to have something communicate with this satellite if it were to go out of communication or anything like that. But then soon I will redirect it back to Kerbin, because by the time it gets to Duna, it will be far enough away that the cone, the angle that it has there, because all the radio dishes there, they have an angle that allows them to generate a cone, and the further away they get, the wider the endpoint of it is. And by the time we get to Duna, we're going to have that cone wide enough that it should be able to target entirely all of Kerbin and pick up anything that is pointing back toward it. So we don't need to specifically target a Tidris satellite. Whoops, looks like I went a little bit too far. That's alright, the RCS is on. I'll just hold down the N key here and back off a little bit until it re-intercepts with Duna. There we go. Alright, so we'll scroll back in here, check the trajectory, see how it's looking. It's looking pretty good. We're heading on the way to Duna. You can see we've got multiple satellites up there actually, and when they get to Duna, then you'll get to see how they all separate out and go to different places around that planet. For now, we'll just target back to Kerbin like I said I was going to, and that's going to be it for here. Now I'm back in my lackluster mod viewer because I had another idea for the form of a lander. One here where you can see I've put radial engines on the Okay, pretend I meant to do that. Radial engines on the sides of it here, and I gotta work on the balance of it, and maybe put a gyro, maybe put some extra vectoring in those engines or something in order to make them be able to land and maneuver. But you can see the basic idea here is I want to have a couple cargo bays, like a little room up top and a little room down at the bottom that extends down, and maybe could have a little rover in there or something like that. Speaking of rovers, I think I'd like to have a rover when I do my reference mission to try to get this Kethane thing going, so I decided to throw together a few parts here that are a little rover-like, thinking about how I might have them all pack up nicely inside a fairing as well. I put the wheels on hinges. I didn't know how much power it was going to use, so I put a whole bunch of batteries up on top as well. Turned out that it wasn't really using a ton of power, although that's probably also because I didn't really look into the wheels to see how much they should be using in my install, so they're just using however much comes on them normally when you're playing stock. I decided to take it out for a little spin, jump it over some of those little ridges there to see how well it does on tight turns and jumps, because, you know, of course, this is exactly what you want to do, is go joyriding when you're out on the moon or on Duna, right? Yeah, so that's what we're doing here. We're gonna run off the end of the cliff there. We're gonna drive up onto things that we probably shouldn't be driving on, and probably wouldn't find this kind of a thing on the moon anyway. By rotating up those wheels, it was able to pop itself back up again, and then just put the wheels back down, and off we go again. However, there was only one antenna on it, so even though I can control those servos and flip myself back up, without that antenna, we're not going anywhere. So another test was required, and this time we put more than one antenna just in case one of them were to break off. Bill would be so happy with us. He probably wouldn't be quite as happy with the fact that we put the wheels on upside down, but that's okay. We can go out and try out that robotic arm anyway. The theory here is we might want to use a robotic arm in order to do some kind of EVA type construction. Well, I guess not EVA, of course, it's a rover. The rover is going to be unmanned and driving around. I guess that's not really called EVA in a case like that. Anyway, what I'm working on here is trying to get that robotic arm to work through command keys, like the 1, 2, 3 action groups, that sort of thing. I've put more than one servo into an action group, and what I'm trying to do is get it to extend out while also keeping that little decoupler pointed the exact same way that I have it. With a little bit of tweaking, check it out here. This is what I'm trying to achieve. I finally got one good example of it. I have to put an extra number there, switch that middle servo to 2, but notice how when it extends out now, that decoupler stayed straight, parallel or perpendicular to the ground, however you want to think about it. One more test here now, because I want to see if I can get it to extend out with one hotkey and retract with another. That should be pretty simple. So there's my extend and there's my retract, and that should allow me to reach out and grab things. Seems pretty simple, right? So then I put one of our drills, a Kethane drill, just for some experimentation, out onto a little decoupler and a strutter sort of thing in between, and then we're going to try to pick it up and put it on its feet, because I want to see if this is a kind of thing that I'd be able to do. However, there's no rotator on there yet, so in order to get it to actually be in the right position and get that strut thing that's laying on the ground out of the way, I kind of had to bang into it a few times, but finally I was able to start giving it a try. And if I were to put it into one word how this whole thing went, I think that word would have to be clumsy. Indeed, this was like a new lover fumbling around in the dark with no idea what to do, because I could not get those parts together. So maybe what's needed is that rotator that I was talking about. So here we go. We'll bring down the wheels and then bring down the arm, and now we can rotate it. And by rotating it, it allows us to quite easily push that strut out of the way. And just in case we're not lined up correctly, after we rotate the head back into position, maybe we can then rotate that whole arm to get the decoupler into the right position. Doing a little bit of a control from here and setting a target, I might also be able to use that Navy fish docking alignment indicator there to get an idea of exactly how far away I am, and perhaps we can get this one to dock up. A little bit of fumbling around in the dark, still a little bit of banging the two ends together, and eventually I do manage to get it, but I wouldn't say that it's any kind of overwhelming success, because that drill, I have given it a 4-ton mass. And after we hook this up, even though, look on the Rover, those white things in the back of the Rover, those are just solid masses that come out of the LL pack of parts, and they weigh 5 tons each. So despite the fact that that is 10 tons of extra mass trying to hold down my Rover, I'm still having issues with that 4-ton drill and trying to get it all pulled up. And on top of everything, I made the mistake of extending out the legs too early. I should have put it up on its back there and then extended the legs, and now it's lifted up the whole Rover. Perhaps decoupling it will help. If we just decouple it, it'll go and it'll push itself back into the right position. Nope, instead it starts falling over and sliding down and landing on the back of the Rover. Maybe I can use the Rover to push it up. If I no, that's not working either. Yeah, so this is what I'm talking about. Just fumbling around in the dark, not really getting anywhere. I'll speed it up now just so you can see what I went through in order to try to get this thing standing up. But I think you'll also agree while you watch this that that is not exactly how I want to spend a whole bunch of time up on the moon on my reference mission and over on Duna doing the real thing. If I were to try to move something around and put it up on its back legs there properly. I'm doing this now just because I feel like I really must, not because this is how I'm going to do things. But eventually, we finally get it rotated up into the right position. I've moved the legs down because I figured that might give it a little extra stability. Not the legs, the wheels. I moved the wheels originally down there, and then finally I was able to get it lined up. The sun has come up. We were working on it for so long. It was just before sunrise when I first started messing around with it. Now it's well over the horizon. Perhaps what we need is just a bigger arm, right? Because then if we had a bigger arm, we could actually lift it up onto its back legs, that drill there, and we wouldn't be flipping us all over the place. So I'm trying it with a bigger arm here, and you tell me, what do you think? Is this going to be working out any better than the original one? Really, I'm beginning to question the whole idea of using these rovers or any kind of rover in order to do this sort of stuff to begin with. In order to really understand it, I think you might want to take a look in the bottom corner, right corner there of the screen. I have put in a link to a video. It's not my video, it's some video that I saw on YouTube that was all about the Constellation program and America going to Mars. It got canceled, and that's why the video link says Constellation defunct. But the original idea was that they were going to do this transfer where they send over the crew and different landers in these different transfer vehicles, and then when they get there, some of them would be robotic and they would go out and sort of help construct the base before the crew actually went down to the surface, and then the crew would go down and transfer over in its own nice cool looking vehicle and go down to the surface in one of the other vehicles that had already been sent ahead of time and was waiting in orbit, so they'd know whether it was actually safe to use and if it was in the right place and had all the systems were in order and everything. Lots of contingency gear and stuff like that. Well, that's similar to what I want to do, but I want to do it Kerbal style, which means bigger and better, more ships and more bigger rovers, cooler and more interesting vehicles that get deployed, much more contingency equipment, double up on everything to make sure if anything goes wrong, then we have it covered. Now, this test is what would it look like if I were putting it just on a hinge where I bring it over the top and drill down. I showed it out on the pad there to see how far down into the ground it would go. Showing it out here in this assembly building, you're coming out of the SPH, because that's where I wanted to take off and fly around from, and it allowed me to put those jets on the side there radially. Anyway, I've realized I've spent an awful lot of time playing around with all these different configurations of this kind of lander, that kind of lander, robotic arm, this and that, blowing things up when they don't quite land right. We need to go find out what's happening at the base.
Okay, Joseph, what is this urgent news you have?
Well, Bob told me about his fear that something was wrong with the station, and he's sort of right. Everyone is safe, but we're detecting slips in the time continuum.
Once again in Kerbalese, please? I don't understand what any of that means.
Okay, think of our universe as a delicious snack. You can smell a snack from far away sometimes because bits of that snack break off and float away, ending up in your nose where you can smell them. You can't see it, but you know it's there. Well, the alternate universe is breaking off and floating into our universe through the anomalies. Things that never happened in our universe can be witnessed, and things that we think happened might actually just be memories that are bleeding from the alternate universe into ours. Basically, it's like smelling a snack. We can sense the alternate universe. Valentina is in our space station, but in a nearly identical parallel universe, Valentina may have stayed on the ground and someone else may have gone up instead. Bob is sensing that difference. What this means is we can never be truly sure anything we are doing or seeing is real. It'll slowly get worse as time goes by, too, and so we need to finish this trip to Duna as soon as we can.
Okay, then we better summarize where we are on all the projects. Computer, activate Duna Summary 001.
Tidris C-Class Communications, nominal. Tidris D-Class Communications, now operational. Kethane Scan Summary. Kerbin Scan, incomplete. Moon Scan, complete. Duna Launch Summary. Deep Space Comsats, in sleep mode. Curb and escape in 3 days. Duna network, curb and escape in 1 day. Asteroid intercept, nominal, ETA 4 days.
Wait a second, sir. We're still missing one more thing.
That one more thing is one more satellite to head toward Duna. They have not sent a Kethane scanner yet, so I need to get a Kethane scanner headed there on its way, and here it goes now. We'll get this one going, and we have all those other ones to take care of as well, but all of that is going to happen next time, because for this one, we are done for now. Until then, I will see you later, Kerbinauts.